Welcome to another deep dive, and this one you actually recommended to me.
I did.
It's called "What Is It Like to Be an Addict" by Owen FLANAGAN. And just from like the intro, it already seems really interesting.
It is really fascinating. It's part memoir, part this like deep dive into addiction, and I can already tell that Flanagan is not holding anything back.
So I guess maybe to start, like, who is this guy? Who is Owen FLANAGAN? What led him to write this?
So he's actually a pretty big name in philosophy and mind sciences,
Oh, wow.
which makes his personal story even more fascinating.
But he's an addict.
He was, and he is very upfront about it. Like in the book, he talks about how his early experiences with alcohol, like growing up with cocktail hour as this kind of normal family ritual,
Yeah.
kind of set the stage maybe for his later struggles.
It's interesting how things that seem so innocent on the surface can really shape our, I guess, our relationship with substances.
Totally. Yeah. And Flanagan really dives into that. Like, he doesn't just point fingers at his past or anything. He really takes you through his own, like, spiral into addiction, the denial, the rationalizations, all of that.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's a little unsettling at times. He's really raw and honest about it.
So he's not afraid to get personal.
Not at all. He uses actually a combination of his own experiences and the experiences of other addicts to kind of paint this comprehensive picture of what it's like to be an addict. He calls it autophenomenology and heterophenomenology, basically looking at addiction from both the inside and the outside.
Okay, so both his own experience and like the experiences of other addicts to really, I guess, give this full picture.
Exactly.
And what kind of stories does he share? What like stood out to you as particularly insightful or impactful?
Well, there's this one story about a woman named Caroline Knapp, and she describes cocktail hour in her family as like this magic tension reliever. And it kind of gets you thinking, like how societal and cultural influences can make certain individuals more susceptible to substance abuse.
Yeah, for sure.
Like it's not just, it sounds like he's kind of pushing back on that whole addiction is a choice narrative.
Right.
Like it's way more complicated than that, right? And he backs it up too. He doesn't just rely on anecdotes and stories. He brings in his expertise and, mind sciences, and he kind of dissects that whole dopamine hit explanation that gets thrown around a lot.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so he goes into detail about like the 18 neurocircuits involved and all the different neurotransmitters. It's not just dopamine, and it's not that simple.
18 neurocircuits.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot more than just dopamine.
It is. So you start to realize that addiction is so much more complex than like a simple pleasure-seeking behavior.
So it sounds like he's bringing like both a personal and a scientific perspective to this topic.
Yeah, definitely. And he even tucks on Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah. He acknowledges its effectiveness, for some, but he questions some of the core tenets of it.
Like what?
Like he pushes back on that whole loss of control narrative.
Okay. That's pretty bold considering how established AA is.
Yeah, it is. And, I don't want to give too much away, but what I will say is that he challenges you to really think about the individual's role in their own recovery,
Okay.
their agency. It's not just about like surrendering to a higher power. It's about really understanding yourself and the complexities of your mind and figuring out how to reclaim your own life.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. It sounds like he's really trying to like dismantle some of these common stereotypes about addiction and offer this like more nuanced understanding.
Exactly. And he even talks about like different types of addicts, like willing versus unwilling, which completely changes how you view addiction as a whole.
Yeah.
It's not just one thing.
So I'm definitely putting this on my reading list. It sounds really eye-opening.
Oh, it is. And one of the things that really struck me is how relatable his story is, even if you've never struggled with addiction yourself.
Yeah.
He talks about hitting rock bottom in a way that, like, anyone who's faced any kind of hardship can relate to.
What was that like for him? What did that look like?
He describes this daily Heineken ritual,
Okay.
but it wasn't, like, out of enjoyment. It was out of this desperate need to escape this like overwhelming self-loathing he was feeling. It was his way of coping.
Wow.
But it also shows how addiction can take over in such a profound way, like it's dictating your every move.
But the addiction itself becomes the biggest source of pain.
Exactly. And that's just one small part of his story. There's so much more in this book.
So where do we go from here? What other aspects of this should we dive into?
Well, he goes beyond just his personal experience. He gets into the social and cultural influences that contribute to addiction, and that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Let's explore that, but first, What are your initial impressions of what we've discussed so far?
Honestly, I'm hooked. It sounds like Flanagan is taking us on this journey that's both personal and universal. Like he's saying, look, this is what it was like for me, but here's how it connects to the bigger picture, you know?
You got it. And that's what makes this book so powerful.
I'm ready to dive deeper. Where should we go next?
So yeah, Flanagan really gets into those social and cultural influences that can like contribute to addiction.
Yeah.
And he doesn't just like skim the surface. He makes you think about all the messages we get about substance use, like both explicitly and implicitly, you know?
Okay, yeah, what kind of messages?
Well, think about like that whole boys will be boys mentality.
Right.
He argues that these kinds of cultural norms, especially around masculinity, can actually make men more vulnerable to alcoholism.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Like, if excessive drinking is seen as like a rite of passage or a sign of manhood,
Right.
it creates this like pressure, this dangerous pressure.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about gender either. Like, he talks about how social and economic factors play a huge role too.
Like certain groups are almost predisposed because of their circumstances.
Yeah, he touches on that for sure. And, it's not about making excuses or anything. It's about recognizing that addiction is this like really complex interplay of personal choices and societal influences.
It makes you wonder how much is willpower versus like these systemic issues that need to be addressed.
Right. And he brings up this really fascinating concept called scaffolding blame.
Scaffolding blame.
Yeah. So it's about shifting away from that like traditional punitive view of blame and moving towards something more supportive.
Okay.
That like recognizes the addict's responsibility, but also focuses on helping them, move forward.
So instead of just, you messed up, you deal with it, it's more like, okay, you made a mistake, but let's, figure out how to build you back up.
Exactly. Like offering a scaffold to help someone rebuild their life, hence the name. And he applies the same concept to shame.
Oh, interesting.
Like instead of letting shame just consume you, it's about reframing it, seeing it as a sign that you're not living up to your own values and using that as motivation for change.
That's a cool way to look at it.
Yeah, it's not about denying responsibility, but it's acknowledging that there are like these larger forces often at play.
Right, for sure.
And he also, critiques some of the systems in place. Like we talked about his nuanced take on AA.
Yeah.
He actually pushes back against that whole addiction is a disease model too.
Really? I would have thought, given his scientific background,
Yeah.
he would have been all about that.
Well, he doesn't totally dismiss, the biological components, but he feels that terms like disorder or dysfunction might be more accurate.
Okay.
He argues that addiction is so pervasive, it affects every aspect of a person's life. It doesn't fit neatly into that traditional definition of a disease.
So it's not just a chemical imbalance or a craving. It's about how that craving like impacts your thoughts, your relationships, your whole sense of self.
Exactly. And that actually ties into another fascinating concept he explores, that addiction can become intertwined with a person's identity.
Like their addiction becomes who they are.
Yeah, in a way. He uses the term identity constitutive, meaning that for some addicts, their addiction becomes this like defining characteristic.
Oh, wow.
It shapes how they see themselves, how they interact with the world.
That must make recovery so much harder.
Yeah.
Because you're not just battling a substance, you're battling a part of yourself.
Exactly. And he breaks it down further, talking about willing addicts versus like unwilling or resigned addicts, which just highlights how diverse the experience of addiction can be.
So even within the world of addiction, there's no like one-size-fits-all understanding.
Right, exactly. It's so dangerous to generalize or stereotype addicts because every person's story is unique.
Right.
And their path to recovery is going to be unique too.
I'm curious, how does he illustrate these different experiences? Does he just use like clinical examples or?
Actually, he weaves in these really interesting examples from literature and film.
Oh, like what?
Well, he mentions memoirs like Caroline Knapp's Drinking, a Love Story,
Okay.
where she describes alcohol almost like a romantic partner. It's interesting. And he analyzes characters like Rust Cole from True Detective.
Right.
This detective who seems to find like a sense of purpose in his struggles with addiction.
It's such a clever way to make these like complex ideas more accessible.
Totally.
And relatable. And it also highlights how deeply ingrained addiction is in our culture.
It really does. It's a reminder that we can't just ignore it, It's all around us and we need to engage with it in this like thoughtful and compassionate way.
This book is challenging, like, on so many levels. It's making me rethink everything I thought I knew about addiction.
It is. And, one of the most thought-provoking parts is how he uses all these different threads. His personal story, the scientific insights, social commentary, even literary analysis
Yeah.
to build towards this really crucial question.
Okay, I have to ask, what's the question?
So the question he kind of leaves us with is, if addiction is so complex and it's influenced by all these social and cultural factors, like,
Yeah.
what is our responsibility
As individuals.
as a society?
Both. And he doesn't really give you any easy answers,
Yeah.
which is frustrating but also thought-provoking,
Yeah.
It's like he's challenging us to really, like, sit with these uncomfortable truths and figure out our own role in creating a world where addiction, has less power.
So it's not like a how-to guide, it's more like a call to action.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
He talks about, like, the importance of harm reduction,
Okay.
meeting people where they are and providing support that's, realistic and tailored to their needs.
Like recognizing that recovery isn't one size fits all, right?
Exactly. And he emphasizes the need for, like, more compassionate and effective treatment options,
Yeah.
moving away from those, like, simplistic narratives that lead to judgment and stigma.
He uses this really powerful word, reckoning, basically saying we need to acknowledge how much luck and circumstance play into people's lives, and that, a lot of addicts are facing challenges that go way beyond just a lack of willpower.
It's a reminder that addiction doesn't discriminate.
Totally.
It can affect anyone, regardless of their background or social standing or anything.
Right. And that we need to approach it with empathy and understanding rather than, condemnation.
For sure.
He's advocating for a more nuanced understanding of it, recognizing the interplay of personal choices and these larger societal forces.
So it's not just about treating the individual, but also addressing the systemic issues that contribute to addiction in the first place.
Exactly. He even talks about the need for, like, a more just and equitable society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Yeah.
And where those who do struggle with addiction are met with support, not shame.
It's a powerful message. And it's honestly a bit overwhelming to think about all the implications.
It is, but I think that's the point. He wants us to sit with that discomfort, to really grapple with these complexities and our own role in perpetuating or dismantling the systems that contribute to it,
It sounds like this book is more than just an exploration of addiction. It's like a call for a more compassionate and just world.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. This deep dive into what is it like to be an addict has been eye-opening, to say the least.
Yeah. We've covered Flanagan's personal story, the science behind addiction, the role of shame and blame, the influence of society and culture, even his critique of AA.
It's a lot to process.
It is. But I think the biggest takeaway for me, and hopefully for our listener, is that addiction is a human experience,
Yeah.
something that deserves our attention, our compassion, and our understanding.
Absolutely. It's not something to be feared or shamed, but something to be understood and addressed with nuance and empathy.
Exactly. So for our listener, if you're intrigued by what you've heard today, I highly encourage you to check out What Is It Like to Be an Addict? It's a book that will stay with you long after you finish reading it. And as you delve into Flanagan's insightful exploration, consider this. If addiction is so deeply intertwined with our social fabric, our cultural norms, even our own identities, what role can each of us play in creating a world where recovery is not just possible, but probable? A world where addiction has less power and hope has more.
I think that's a perfect note to end on.